Hi, and welcome to this week's episode. This week, I'm joined by a very good friend who's also a psychotherapist, Ronen Stilman, and we talk attachment. We really go into subject matter around devices, what attachment is, why it's important. And this is probably the first conversation I've had where I was bouncing off somebody quite a bit in terms of the way that we think and the way that we both approach this subject matter. So we don't go into full psychobabble. You will be pleased to know that. I do kind of rein us in terms of the language that we use. But this is a really interesting concept for some of you. You'll get a sneak peek in terms of some of my thinking around my writing for my book and what I teach. So for those of you who are interested in what is it that I would be getting if I contacted Kath for any training, that there would be conversations around this 45, 50 minutes that we did today. We're probably going to have another conversation because there's just so many avenues to go down in terms of therapeutic, psychological, sociological theories that underpin our behaviour in and around digital spaces, digital devices, technology, cyberspace, whatever you want to call it, virtual landscapes. That it's just a really, really interesting conversation. We do talk parenting, we talk therapy, we talk things that we've noticed in terms of human behaviour and development. It's a proper smorgasbord. Yeah, I really enjoyed this conversation, really enjoyed this conversation. And when I listened back to it, there's elements that I missed to continue talking about. So I've kind of made my own little notes about going back to Ronen and saying, how about we talk about this area, see if we can expand it that little bit more. But as you'll hear, we were just literally bouncing off each other in terms of fizz buzzies, you know, my term about kind of getting those synapses firing and what we were thinking of. Hopefully you'll all enjoy it. If you are a therapist, because I know that both Ronen and I will share this to therapist networks, please do share it around your students. This is a really new and evolving area, and there's it's about a decade of my research and inquiries around this that sit behind a lot of the conversations that we have. Yeah, this is going to be really interesting for those of you who do work with clients who present with what they call issues with it, or present with what they don't think are issues, or parents who send their children with what they think are issues, etc. ad infinitum. So as per usual, I'm now going to do the bit that I'm really quite rubbish at in terms of my podcast. Please subscribe on iTunes. Please subscribe on YouTube. It depends on where you're watching this. Please do share this around, but also please comment and leave a review. And go back to episodes that you might have missed, listen to them, come back to this one. This is an ever evolving podcast, and it is mainly about human behavior, attachment, trauma. This is the real human side of digital technology. So have a good week. We're still not out of COVID. That much I can tell you, because this will go out first Monday of July, which means that we won't have got past the first week of people going back. Although I'm sure that there's going to be bumps on the way. So we'll find where we are with that. I hope the weather's lovely. It's been okay during most of lockdown for many of us. Take care, be well, stay safe, and stay home if you need to. Welcome to Cyber Synapse. This week I'm joined by Ronen Stilman. He's an integrative transactional analysis practitioner, psychotherapist, trainer, supervisor, and one of my esteemed colleagues who also shares a lot of opinions, fascination and curiosity around the internet, around our devices. And essentially what we're going to talk about today is probably pluralistic approaches, attachment, technology, where we're going, COVID. So, you know, welcome Ronen, and thank you for giving me the time for this. I'm really excited.
Thank you for having me, Kath. I love speaking to you. I'm sure you're aware of that.
I think we geek out a little bit. I think that's what it is. So we've just had actually a quick off-screen conversation about technology and where we're heading with it. So do you want to start with what you have noticed in terms of where we're currently at? I'm just thinking about this conversation that we've just had about COVID.
Yeah.
and suddenly the influx of technology into everybody's lives.
Yeah. Um, I think we both noticed some sort of an ambivalence relationship of the therapeutic community with technology. And of course, I understand the ambivalence. I understand that. Um, and at the same time, what's happened recently with the COVID-19 pandemic is that technology itself had allowed us as a community to survive,
Mm.
in some cases, to actually continue to work, and it really, in a way, forced the issue for the psychotherapy community in terms of the existence of technology. In some cases, it actually exists and it can be used. The advantages, the risks, the questions outstanding that we have around how we work with technology.
Mm.
And I think it's a great time to start opening that conversation. And one of the things that I'm aware of is that there is a tendency to kind of go into this is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong, this is safe, this is unsafe. This kind of a polarizing narrative, I
Mm-hmm.
think, is unhelpful, because the technology that we're using, the internet, is a new technology. It's a 2 decades old. The iPhone, Facebook, social media is 1 decade old. It's new. We don't understand yet the implications that using the technology have. We have a view, an initial infancy understanding of where we're at.
Mm-hmm. And I would say, and a lot of that comes from a place of fear. There's I think we were talking those injunctions, the don'ts. I've noticed that there's a lot of scaremongering, research that's being touted as this is the evidence, and yet we haven't had a longitudinal period to be able to say, actually, this is what we found to be the impact, or this is what we found to be the progress, the positives. This is how it works with us, for us, against us. And I'm really curious actually about all of these diagnoses that appear, and ways that we can have a digital detox as though we've been poisoned by this technology. And I think our language and narrative at the moment is very fear-based.
Yeah, and language is a mindset. Language is an indication of what goes inside. And again, we earlier talked about, I really like this idea of the dialectics of progress, Barker's idea that when there's a big advance, then there is an advance, but there's also some sort of a shadow to that that is present, we don't fully understand. And I think the internet and its vastness of it's limitless, and its foreverness. That's something that you say about the internet, its foreverness. That is unhuman. These are things that are so alien to the human existence. We are not forever. We are not vast. We are limited. We are interim. And I think that's very, very scary, because there's something, I think, alien about that. And at the same time, something very attractive and seductive. And when we are attracted and seduced, we are also a little bit scared.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's the apprehension, isn't it? But yeah, I'm just thinking, oh my goodness, I'm getting so excited already. This is what I was talking about. So I did an article for the UKCP magazine, and I was talking about how some of our theoretical frameworks no longer have the fit for purpose system behind them. So for example, death used to be finite. It was, and this is the human concept, isn't it? Death is finite. You only have X number of years on the planet. Nobody has yet gone past 150 years, so we know that that's kind of like the limit. And yet technology is bringing this existential threat, but also it brings this existential excitement, because technology is now increasing the longevity. I know that some of the people I follow in the biohacking world, they're making statements that they're going to live to 180. So it is that idea of foreverness, and it's beyond our comprehension, I think.
Yeah, and we don't have a benchmark for that as well. So when we don't have a benchmark, where we cannot compare to something, again, there's something very ungrounding about us, about this. You know, it's what is, how do I relate to that? Relating requires, for me to relate to you, I need to have some sort of I use myself as a benchmark. Okay, so how do you impact me? How do I feel about you? How close to am I to you? How far? How scared or defended or whatever in relation to you is a lot about my stance. So if you don't have that benchmark, then you lose, again, you lose ground. So, and what happens when we lose ground? We are in a threat response. And again, that kind of links into where we are at the moment anyway with this pandemic. You know, we are in a kind of a systemic threat response,
Yeah.
where, you know, our existence is a threat because of an invisible virus. We have had a significant change in the way that we relate over the past decade. With the advent of the technology that is very, very social, that it's very, very connected on one hand, but on the other hand, we also see and experience a greater sense of disconnect in family, disconnect interpersonal. You go to public places and everybody's watching their phones. You know, you go to concerts and people are watching the concert through their phones when they are in the concert hall. I mean, it's things like that. There is another layer. And that layer, I think we are starting to attach more and more to it. You know, and attachment is a very powerful process. It is a transformative process. It is a process of growth, but also can be a process of great inhibition and trauma. You know, we experience trauma through a lack of attachment, or an attachment that is dangerous or unsafe or problematic.
Well, this comes from all of that kind of like the interpersonal neurobiology, isn't it? It's the, and I'm thinking of Martin Buber-Idau, but that benchmark that you're talking about has a reference self, and what we have, in fact, I talked about it this morning, is what we now have is this thing that sits in front of us. So rather than it being myself and yourself, there is myself, this thing, and yourself. And I'm beginning to integrate this thing that's in front of me, whether it's a screen on a laptop, desktop, iPhone, that it becomes that thing about the screen then becomes part of you. And I
think it's an incredibly important point, because I think it's getting bigger. Because it's not anymore that I see you, I touch the screen. So on average, right? On average, let's say the UK adult spends about 3 hours a day touching the screen about 1,000 times a day. Imagine what it would be like to stroke somebody 1,000 times a day. There is, you know, so our language of attachment, eye contact and touch, are activated. So we are becoming emotionally connected to these things.
Well, this is the premise. This is the premise of my cyber trauma theory, and how I've actually said that. So I'll make it very brief and simple. But our very first experience of safety and security is post womb. So there we are. We've been born, and you know it's a bit Disney. This, you know, mother holds the baby towards the breast. The baby hears and feels that somatic, that haptic feedback. There is this eye-to-eye connection. It's true attachment in its most beautiful form, and that baby then gets this inherent sense of this is safe. Well, the thing that I noticed, and it came from kind of a lot of the ophthalmology research, because my background's in eyes and lasers and sights, and anyway, and what I noticed was that people also sit about the same distance as babies do from breast to eye or breast to face. And that actually what I've noticed is we have that same zone of safety, proximity. And I think that there's a lot of biology being evoked in our interactions with screens. And yet that kind of haptic feedback of I touch you is exactly how it happens in the early formative space for babies, in terms of mother touches baby, baby touches mother. There's a reciprocation. It's all somatic, it's haptic. And then the kind of nuances that I'm seeing are, and what about those children who aren't born in those secure settings, who don't get that experience, who then move into this technology and are touching without having that very first baseline reference to kind of relate to?
Oh, that's such an interesting point, because so how I think about this is then what happens with digital natives. Yeah, they are born to this reality, unlike perhaps you and I and older generations of digital migrants, where they did not have a competing attachment experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, is that so if you're in that, if you are growing up in these circumstances, yes, you don't have that real mother father attachment figure. Might you replace your ability to attach and regulate with technology? So technology, if what we're talking about, this attachment, means that I think we are using technology more and more as a form of regulating
Mm-hmm. Mm.
ourselves, because it has a touch and a vision. And I think, in a few years, probably sensory and auditory, this is what the immersive movie experience now. You go to this 4D and everything moves and water is sprinkled on you. And, there's something very, this immersive experience that we talk about means that we use technology or technology evokes an emotional response, and that emotional response creates an attachment, and that, I think, is what I'm really interested in how does that attachment going to get translated in the coming years to good things like working with VR and working with biofeedback that I know you're really interested in. And what's the shadow aspect of it?
Mm-hmm.
What does attachment to technology do to our ability to socialize and bond, given that attachment is a key vehicle for socialization and bonding?
Yeah.
These are questions. I'm not proposing a gloom and doom scenario. I think it's really important to say that. They said, oh my God, we're going to get all in love with our screens and therefore we will stop being able to socialize. No, that is not what I'm saying. I'm saying that there is a process that we do not understand yet. We don't have language and theory to explain what is happening. We have a language and theory to understand, to name those, we were talking about attachment and neurobiology, but what actually is going to be the result of this?
Mm-hmm.
It's early. We don't know, and we are not going to know.
Yeah, I'm actually in a process at the moment of going off on lots of different tangents in terms of my thinking, the research. And one of the things I've noticed is that immersive technology is changing the way that I'm relating with my clients in a therapeutic setting, but also the way that I then go and use technology has resulted in my thinking expanding and going, oh my goodness, this could be used so brilliantly for therapy, but it can also be abused and misused by those people who are, they are the people in society that use things for evil, for ill, the kind of framework that we have there. And yet I'm seeing that I have this, I have this polarity all of the time. I'm very polemic in terms of I'm excited but fearful, I'm curious but reticent, and it's always this dichotomy of I'm so excited, and yet, as you're saying, I'm then sitting with the therapeutic community saying, come on, we need to be really looking at this. We need to be really getting excited and trying to do deep research on it. And what I do find is that it's something that people are saying, well, we'll just use this bit, Kath, and there doesn't seem to be the
Let's just talk about Zoom. and I think we talked about this example about the cars, right? So cars were introduced in the beginning of the previous century, and when they were introduced, some people are absolutely terrified about it because it's like, what is this big thing that makes lots of noise, and you know, and some people thought, wow, this is amazing, and it completely transformed how we live. It increased urbanization. It completely changed our perception of distance. It became a big industry. And now we know, in hindsight, a significant contributor to global warming, to pollution. And an interesting thing is that cars are really dangerous machines.
Yeah.
They kill. They kill. But do we not drive them as a result? And I think this is the same question that I have. Yes, this new technology has danger in that all the new things that we find out are dangerous if we do not understand them, if we don't understand our limitations in relating to them, in driving them, excuse the pun.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing. I want to be on the driving seat in terms of our relationship with technology, rather than on this sort of recipient, passive, scared, frozen.
Yeah, well, this is where the technology brings it. I mean, this is why I came up with the cyber trauma theory. And when I first said cyber trauma, I was talking about traumas that were caused to the person, but actually the technology can cause that same trauma. And it's in terms of, as it advances, I see. Well, it's that that you were talking about earlier. It's that reticence to use something because it's the fear of not knowing exactly what it is and what does it bring. And unfortunately, we do happen to have a number of people who have authored some books, authored some articles, and recently there was one going around that there seems to be a bit of an argument in cyberspace about technology is bad for mental health because it's just as addictive as heroin or more addictive than heroin. And then there becomes this argument back about, well, no, it's less dangerous than boiling potatoes. And, you know, we've had this debate for a long time, the video screen debate, the screen time debate. And it would seem that as soon as there's a media-driven push to say this technology is doing this, it is causing this, I think we can buy into that because humans like sensationalism and to pay attention to the fear.
Yeah, and I also think that, you know, obviously there is an element of truth in that, but there's also food is addictive, you know, exercise is addictive and can be an addiction and can cause harm. And I think this is the thing. It's there's something about saying, yes, this can be addictive. Yes, this can be dangerous. And yes, this might not be that different from any other things that we have to relate to in our world. And I think the answer here is not to jump into conclusion, but to really be open, to understand and to explore and to become curious about the possibilities, the limitations, the strengths, the weaknesses. That's I think the bit for me that is missing. Less judgment, more conversation, more curiosity, more openness about I wonder, and as therapists, that's what we are inviting others to do in the therapeutic space, rather than jumping to conclusion about your value. How about we notice what's happening? How about we explore what's happening and what happens to you in relation to that?
Well, I mean, that's where a lot of my knowledge has come from, is those wanderings with my clients about the technology and about what they feel it's doing and you know how it's changing their relationships and what they've noticed. So I'm quite curious to ask you then, why do you think there's the lack of wandering from certain communities such as ours and you know psychiatrists and there seems to be the opposite. Actually, there isn't any curiosity really in terms of parenting, because what I'm finding is there's a lot of fear being driven at the parents about children becoming addicted to these devices, to these games, you know, this screen time. And funnily enough, I noticed that the narrative really changed when we went into COVID, and all of the sudden ills of screen time were now being seen as, well, actually, we socialize through it. And I thought, isn't that funny
Yeah.
how we do that?
I think for me, it's, again, as a parent, and as a parent who's gone through those processes with my children around screen time and being worried about their experience and worried about their childhood and worried about the effect. And we have long conversations about technology and its impact and what does it sometimes stops you from doing. You're playing a Minecraft rather than playing outside when it's a beautiful day. What's that about?
Mm-hmm.
But I think the why is that is again it's the lack of understanding. That's what drove me into starting to understand more. When I started to notice that my children behave in a very different way in terms of how they socialize,
Yeah.
I was alarmed. I was alarmed. And I was alarmed because for one thing, it was very different from my experience. I spent my childhood on the street, not in the house playing on the computer games with a person who lives next door to me. We would be outside. Now, is that better or worse? My initial stance was, oh, that's terrible. That's not okay. And I think now, given that the frame has changed, I'm thinking, oh my God, if we didn't have that, my kids will be completely and utterly depressed.
Yeah.
Because they would have no contact with their peers. So maybe there is an advantage here. Maybe there are times where this is actually really helpful and useful, which is not to say that if it's like that all the time, it's okay. And I think this grandiosity of all or nothing,
Yeah.
Talk about the polarity, is where we are at a personal level and at a societal level, because this is new and we don't fully understand it. And some of the things, when we have new technology that we don't understand, then the first people who cash on it are what you call the evil people, yeah? So, when the telegraph and the radio was introduced, then propaganda of the Nazis became a big thing.
Mm.
When the social media was introduced, then we got Trump and Brexit. I think these things are linked. So our first experience of this at a systemic level isn't particularly good. And I think that creates fear. And I think our task, both as a community, is to educate ourselves in terms of where's the power in this, and how might this power be a force for good, for development, for physis, for humanistic development and growth.
Absolutely. I think the systemic, I'm just thinking actually that systemic view is really welcome. Actually, I'm just thinking that this is about, so we've had this so many times before. We've had it on books, we've had it on music, it doesn't matter what that new form. And I'm thinking it's more around communication rather than technology. So if we think about ye olde caveman that sat around, we sat around and told stories around a fire. And then when we could pass those stories on in a different way, that was when it was seen as a difficult transition, because we started to write things down. And that meant that everybody within that tribe would then have to upskill to be able to move into that new level of communication. So I'm going to go off a slight tangent here. This is almost like Ken Wilber's levels of integral theory, that as you go up the systems, you actually find that you're losing people behind you because they're not able to upskill, they're not able to stay in that realm with you. And then you have this elitist divide, which is what I think might be happening at the moment, in terms of, those of us that are moving with the technology, that understand it. And, I'm thinking about my childhood was slightly different to yours, because I did go do quite a bit of computing. I've been around them since I was about 9, 10, 11. So my passion for this technology has meant that this is my second language. And I'm really comfortable in and around this space and this technology and how it works and what it does and its potentials and where we're heading. And then I have to kind of rein myself back in and think, okay, so what is going on with this system, and what are the stumbling blocks, what are the obstacles?
It's really interesting because what I'm getting in touch is with the idea of being, so I'm trilingual, right? So, and I find it fascinating when people say to me, oh, I only, for example, we live in the UK, so I only speak English. And when I speak any other language around them, they become very, very, very uncomfortable. And they're kind of the first place they go to is, oh, you're probably speaking about me. It is obviously, you're not that central. And I think this, it's interesting because for you, technology is a mother tongue. And for digital migrants like me and like a lot of other people in the community, technology is a foreign language. And some people will be interested and curious and will want to learn it. And some people will just say, this is gibberish. I don't understand it and I don't want to understand it. And what they miss is the ability to connect with what's going on.
Yeah.
And that's what happens if I'm able to flip between more than one language, then I can communicate and connect with more people, for example.
To begin with, isn't it polyglot? Isn't it when you can speak 3 or more languages, isn't it a polyglot? Anyway,
I have no idea. English is not my mother tongue.
So I'm sure it is. I'm going to have to go and Google that afterwards. I'm like, is it a polyglot? But anyway, so
you're going to ask Google.
I will do. Actually, it came out of a book that, so I use a terminology for myself, which is polymath, because of different areas. And I'm 99% certain that polyglot is somebody who can speak a number of languages, usually 3 or more, hence polyvagal is 3. And anyway.
That's good to know.
My fizz buzz moment when you were talking then, and I'm now thinking I'm going to go back to the attachment thing, is so your experience is somebody who hears you talk in another language automatically perceives you must be talking about me. So now I'm going to transition that in terms of into cyberspace, that this is what humans do, isn't it? That automatic reaction to, I don't understand what you're doing, therefore it must be about me, therefore I now need to pay attention and I need to be in this space as much as I can to try and, almost work out what it is that you're doing, saying, thinking. Do you think that kind of transitions over into the social media space, that this is why people spend so much time there, because they are making that assumption that other people are looking at me, talking about me, putting things up about me? You know how we do in the corporeal.
I mean, I think there is an element in that. I think the use of social media is a real complex question, and I have a few ideas about that. I think this is one of them. I think there's something also about our we are social animals, so it is another vehicle for socialization. And I also think that it goes back to the connection disconnection difficulty or tension that we have to manage in our lives. I want to connect, and if I'm not connected, I'm disconnected. In this disconnection, isolation, which is a problem that often appears, I think, in the therapeutic space. So if I'm not on social media, does that mean I'm isolated? Or conversely, I have to be on social media as much as possible so that I am not isolated, so that I'm not, this is FOMO, that I don't miss out on information on what's happening there or whatever. And I think there is another thing which we've not talked about yet, which is what happens to us intrapsychically, internally, that drives us to reach out, to pick up the phone. And I think one of the things that I've noticed is that I pick up the phone and I see other people pick up the phone when I'm on my own, or when I'm in an environment that I have to wait, or when I'm perhaps in a public space when there are strangers around me. I think there's something about going to, the familiar, because I carry my entire social world in this little thing,
Yes.
There is a my safety object, my transitional object that helps me regulate. We're going back to say that it helps me regulate my anxiety of being alone in the world. And that helps me remember that it's safe, that there are people out there who are interested in me, who love me, who want to be connected. And therefore, the shadow side of it is, and I don't, the synchronicity of meeting people who are outside of my frame of reference gets lost. Again, the positive and negative and shadow and light aspects of that I'm really interested in that.
I am definitely with you on this one, because one of the things I've noticed is that intrapsychic process is also present when you log on, even though we don't log on anymore. But there's that idea of, you look down at your list or whoever you're following, whatever's going on, and some of the conversations may leave you feeling more disconnected. So that it's that ideal of, you don't know what you're going to meet with, and you don't know what level of contact you will have. And I'm aware that I'm now beginning to use TA kind of terminology, so I'll just rein that back in a bit. That there's something about, we don't know who we will meet, how we will meet them, where we will meet them. And recently, obviously, we're all having to do this 2 meters apart, standing queuing. I've been really fascinated with, because I spent a lot of time really as a child outside playing on my own, and then you do this thing like climbing up trees by yourself and looking out at the world. I think we were talking about stars earlier. That there's something about, I'm able to stand and watch people, and I conversely, I noticed that my children who are in their 20s, they struggle to do that. So I can be stood and just be, bored, watching the wind blow something, watching people walking past, and just being quite okay to watch and stand and be. And yet that feeling, doesn't it, that intrapsychic loneliness pops up, and if you're in a queue, you can pick up your phone and be with people
and stimulated. So, and I think this is the thing. So where I think what this provides is connection, but it also provides stimulation and boredom. You talked about boredom. We know that boredom is about or being able to manage and regulate boredom is about being able to connect with myself, being able to stand still, at a psychological level, rather than get, deregulated in some way. And when we can do that, then we go into a place of creativity, a place of reflection. And if you don't know how to do that, because when you have learned from a very young age to pick up and start touching and stimulating and regulating yourself through something else that is not you, what are you missing in terms of development? The staring at the stars, we talked about earlier about how we like looking at the vastness of the stars and how beautiful that is. There is no equivalent. You will not have that physical and emotional experience through that screen. It's not the same. So again, I have a question mark around that. So how sometimes I make my children, physically make them, I will take the gadget off them and I will put them on and say, just go outside and I don't care, get bored. And I don't yet know if that's the right thing to do. They absolutely detest me for that. But I talk to them about this. I explain to them what my thinking is. And that in itself opens a dialogue, a connection about, development and what, how do you get creative? How do you get, how do you manage loneliness,
Well, I mean, we know that was such an in-club statement then, wasn't it? That was our group. We know, us psychotherapists, actually, I think we know as human beings that loneliness is the most distressing state we can be in. And I think it's I think the biggest killers of the older generation is loneliness, followed by stress and stress related illnesses, etc., etc. I would say that loneliness is a stress related illness, because it evokes and elicits that kind of lack of physiological arousal, doesn't it? So I'm thinking conversely, if you go back to the perinatal spaces, then actually what we might need to do as a society is work with newlyborns and their mothers, and newlyborns and their caregivers, whoever or wherever they may be, in terms of learning how to self-regulate, because we have to have co-regulation followed by self-regulation. And if we didn't get that co-regulation to begin with, then what we're going to notice about co-regulation is that it involves this other thing. Now, I've written about this, but haven't quite said, don't stare at phones, mum, you're going to change the relationship. There is an element of that. But yeah, I see that children are able to do this with each other, so that I'm seeing lots of children learning to co-regulate with each other on their devices. That's really my thinking, is perhaps where it gets missed by the adult, they do learn to do this with each other in terms of, through the virtual space, there's less physical bickering. So I've noticed that when I'm looking at like nursery level or maybe year one, so you're only talking up to about five years of age, that in a corporeal setting, there's a lot of push shove and you know, this is mine, and that negotiation tends to be much easier when they get to about 6, 7, 8, if they're in an online setting. So I suspect that there's a lot of, I want to call it Lord of the Flies. It's young children managing their own space and time.
It's a really interesting metaphor, because if you think about the games that, so my kids are slightly older than that now, and they play the equivalent Lord of the Flies online, which is, you know, Call of Duty or you know, those sort of games where they are packs and they have to negotiate and work together as a team to you know, to win the game, is to alienate the competing team. There is, you know, quite a lot of bickering and swearing associated with that.
Yeah.
And I suppose there is something about, and I think that's obviously, it's a great teacher for group dynamics, for collaboration. And again, if I think about where sometimes where my anxiety gets evoked in relation to that is when it stops. And the dysregulated response that my children can have because I've unplugged them, because it's time to stop. I think that's the bit that I sometimes think parents worry about and say the reaction is it's so palpable, it's so dysregulated, it's so strong that it's strong, you know. And I think I still don't have an answer to that in terms of how do I teach them to relax that. They say, okay, there's time for this and there's time for that.
Now, actually, I've taught and I'm writing about this at the moment. And one of the things I've kind of said is when a parent walks into a room, more often than not, they see their child with the headset on, and within their kind of framework, they walk in and it's their child, and they will say, okay, you need to get off the game now. And I spend an inordinate amount of time in psychotherapy explaining to parents, you're not looking at just your child, you are looking at a football field in essence. And bearing in mind, would you walk straight onto the middle of a football field, pick your child up and say, right, tea time? Or would you look at the landscape? Would you assess what's happening? Would you say to your child, okay, when it gets to half time, when it gets to full time, then I'd like you to come in for your tea, etc., etc. And what I tend to get back from the parents is, well, how do I know that, Kath? And I say, well, go and watch the game. Go and learn about the game. And if you know that there's a save point, or that they're about to complete a match and that there's a time frame on it, you can learn to, and it's about negotiation. You can walk in and you can say, okay, when is your next save point, particularly if they're doing a type of game where they can move through sectors, because that's what leads to a lot of the dysregulation. Is you know,
the abruptness of it.
mum stopped me 30 seconds from my next save point. So I've just lost all of that history, which was time and effort and skill. And, you know, that's really, really important to young people. So for me, there's something about you need to view the landscape as you would do as if you were outside. And more often than not, parents walk in the room, they see their one child shouting at the screen, and
Yes.
they don't know the context of why that's occurring or what's been going on and what the background is to it. Because, you know, children don't just shout at screens for nothing, and they don't get dysregulated without a prompt.
Yes, no, I think that's very important what you're saying, and I do recognize that, and indeed I have learned to accept, oh, I have, you know, 30 seconds for the game, or I need 3 more minutes, and I have learned to not just go, well, I'm just gonna switch it off and
Yeah.
then get into some sort of a power dynamics with them. It's just so I think it's a very important point that you're raising, that there is something about accounting for where they are at that we don't see because we are not present there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's
It's a different landscape, Ronen. I think this is as parents, as practitioners, it's that environment that I don't think many of us understand in terms of what we see is our supposition. It's our assumption about what we think it should be. And as the parent, if you haven't engaged in that technology and you haven't been curious to find out what your child's doing, who they speak to, I mean, for me, I watched my children growing up, and I used to say things like, so they'd have the headset on and they go, right, over here. And I'd say, how does somebody know where you mean? It absolutely blew my head in that these young people knew exactly what was going on. And it took me a while to work out, oh, not only are they navigating this, they're also navigating the audio levels, and they're looking at a heads-up display, and they're looking at a map, and they're looking at something else. And that's when I started to realize, when my kids were about 10, 11, 12, their level of attention and proprioception in terms of what they're doing in the game absolutely superseded anything I'd ever contemplated before. And I find it such a neuroplastic advancement in terms of cognition, what they're doing with their hands, the level of multitasking. But also, I know from the research and kind of what we do, that they can't possibly be giving 100% to each of those tasks, because we can't multitask. It's neurobiologically, we know this. So for me, what's occurring, what's changing, what's going on here, and how do we measure that? And then, you know, these will be, in the next 10 years, people that are going into politics, people that are going into the design of the next level of technology. So,
and to the working space, yeah. And I think that's kind of a closes the circle, I suppose, in a way that there's a lot of things that are changing in a way that we don't fully understand in terms of cognition and capacity to contain a platitude of stimulation, of stimuli. And I think where we started these conversations, and there is something about, okay, so what does it do to attachment?
mm-hmm.
What does it do to your attachment with yourself?
Yeah.
And what is the attachment of you with others? And therefore, where, if that is changing, and it is, because it has to, it makes no sense that it doesn't, then what will that look like at a systemic level in 10, 15 years when these people are adults, when these people are in power positions? So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm thinking that we've done full circle. Is there anything else you would want to put into the conversation, or, you know, is that another half hour, 45-minute debate, or are we kind of where we're at the moment?
I think we're finished for today. I think there is another one coming that I'm thinking a lot about, and then there is this blurring of lines of identities between my identity online and my identity in you talk about this as corporeal. I have been saying this in a different way, which is corporeal. You know, and I didn't realize my mistake until recently when I heard you on a podcast, and I actually checked, said, are we saying the same thing? And there is something about what's real. I have a real question around that. So with everything that's happening, I have a big question about then what becomes real? What's real and what's not? Is the physical more real than the virtual? Is the virtual starting to supersede the physical? And what are the implications again on an interpersonal and systemic, political, societal? So I think that's another conversation.
Yeah, that is definitely something that excites me, because the thing that I didn't bring into today was when you were talking about the same level of interaction. If you have used VR, and the way that and VR is increasing exponentially at the moment, I have found, I mean, for example, I have found myself on the moon. I have found myself on the space station. I have, going back to the sciencey stuff, but I've also been under the water. There are places I have been that visually my body cannot tell the difference, and so we've yet to get into that, because that is all polyvagal, in terms of what that does to my interpretation of real, in terms of, well, hang on a minute, if we go with the line of consciousness, there isn't really a real anyway, because consciousness is the interpretation of what it is that we perceive, we think we're understanding, etc., etc. So I know that that's a completely different.
We are going. Yeah, that's a really interesting and exciting and important conversation that I think we need to have.
Yeah. So what we'll do then after we finish this is we'll book that one in. So thank you. Thank you so much for your time on this this conversation today, Ronen, and I'm really excited actually to go to the next one as well.
A real pleasure. I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun.